going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for tonight's Monday Night Football slate, where we've got two games on the docket. Gonna get you ready for your DFS and your prop lineups. But first off, a look at the Draftkings side and what we're doing for all of our builds. That'll include a look at some of the values on the slate, correlation, the different game environments that we have at hand. And then on the prop and the betting side, we're gonna go through our underdog and prize picks exposure and a few props that have already entered that you might want to consider tailing for yourself. So by the end, you have a pretty good game plan of what to do for this evening. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in. We've got a lot of information to cover, and so let's not waste any time at all. Before we go position by position or even player by player, we've got to talk about the kind of game environments that we've got for Monday Night Football. The first game, we've got the Bucks and the Lions, extremely high total at 53.5, even 54.5 points on a few sports books. The Lions are the handed favorites at about a -6 spread, but in the other game, we got a much lower total, much tighter spread at the same time between the Seahawks and the Texans. So that first game looks a lot more attractive from the fantasy standpoint. You have that high total, two offenses that are extremely competent, also a few defenses that have let up a lot of points so far in 2025. It just feels like an absolute gold mine, at least for fantasy purposes. And with the ownership, you're going to see that reflected almost across all the positions. The wide receiver, you have a few guys popping off from that second game, most notably your wide receiver one from either side. But outside of that, your players that are getting 1.5 to 2 times the ownership of the rest of the field come from this first game. So you've got to ask yourself before you even start building lineups whether you agree with that kind of sentiment or not. If you think the second game could be a little bit higher scoring than what they're calling for, you're an over better on the sports books, then you might want to consider going to that side for some of your leverage. But personally, I do agree with the Vegas scripts. I think both of the totals are pretty much right where they should be. And in this 10 to 11 point higher game, that's where a lot of your 2 to 3 touchdown games are going to come from. These quarterbacks that are getting the 25 to 30 fantasy points and breaking the slate and being the player that you have to have at that position, it's much more likely to come from this first game. So although both of them are significantly higher owned than their counterparts, I think it's deservingly so. In fact, they're about double the ownership of the two quarterbacks towards the bottom, also a little bit more expensive, but like we've had on a few of the 2-game slates so far this year, you're going to have all the salary that you want to work with. At running back, your most expensive one is Gibbs at $7,500. If we go to the wide receiver position, and Amon-Ra is $8,200. At Jackson Smith-Njigba is $7,900. Unless you ran those two wide receivers, a Gibbs, the most expensive tight end, defense, and quarterbacks all together, if you do that, you might start to run into some salary issues. But if you're throwing in any sort of a value, whether it's a value running back, a value wide receiver, or a cheaper tight end, you're going to be able to play whoever the heck you want to across the other 8 positions. So that's the power of value. That's the power of the 2-game slate, and the lineup construction is a little bit different than some of the other ones that we get. And a lot of people, even in the large field GPPs, are going to be doing dupe trains with this first game. And though I do agree with the fact that that game's the one to attack, the one with the more attractive fantasy options, I do have to throw out there that you've got to get different if you're going to be in the big 50 to 100,000 entry contest. If you don't want to duplicate yourself with 500 to 1,000 other people, you've got to think about some of the outside wide receivers, like a Tesla for the Lions. You know, we're going to mention some of these value options later on that can make sense for Tampa Bay if Emeka Egbuka ends up sitting out for this evening. There are ways to get different within that chalkier lineup construction to pull off that kind of a build. So these quarterbacks, they're extremely important when you're building. In fact, I would start there for a majority of these 2-game slate builds because you're going to correlate with your quarterback. You're throwing in a Baker or a Jared Goff. Both of them, of course, don't have a whole bunch of rushing upside. You're going to want at least 1, probably even 2 pass catchers per lineup because it's not a main slate. This isn't a situation where we have 10 to 11, even 12 games to work with. We've got 2 full games to work with, which means you're not going to have the absolute nuts to be in the optimal. And if a quarterback's going for 20 to 25 fantasy points, he's bringing along at least a couple wide receivers for 15 plus fantasy points. So that's why I'm stacking them a little bit more so than it would for main slate, where I might have 1 to 2 pass catchers per lineup. It's going to be 2 plus with both of these more passing heavy quarterbacks. If we go to the running back position, we've got 2 really chalky guys at the top. Jahmyr Gibbs at $7,500, but also over Rashad White, who's going to be running back 1 for the Buccaneers this evening with Bucky Irving hurt. They're over 60% projected ownership, so you're going to have to eat some chalk if you plan on using these premier options, but I don't think that's a mistake. I think you want to spend up at wide receiver, running back whenever you can. Like guys like a JSN, even though he's not in the preferred game that we're attacking, he's going to be in my player pool even at that kind of ownership. And you just got to realize in the back of your mind that you're not getting any different to the field with those sort of players, and that your leverage, in particular in the GPPs, is going to have to come a little bit further down the board. Kenneth Walker, for example, is only 24% owned. If you're looking to get some differentiation, you could jump down to him instead of one of those top 2 guys. But with the fact that I think think that first game's the one to attack for fantasy purposes. That's why I'm on those two a little bit more heavy. David Montgomery's in that first game. He, of course, is running back 2 for Detroit. I'm going for him at about 26.8% ownership for that leverage instead of Kenneth Walker, right? If I'm assuming that this is the shootout, the game that's going to be closer, a little bit more competitive, then I'll even go to the running back 2 instead because of that kind of correlation. So he's currently in my player pool, but in terms of differentiation, I'm looking at a Woody Marks, even a Zach Charbonnet from that second game that aren't as attractive from the projection standpoint. Their median projections aren't quite there, but in the large field GPPs, we're not playing for median projection. We're not playing cash. We're not trying to 2x our money, that kind of thing. We're more so looking to try and have the absolute nuts go big or go home. And at low ownership, sub 25% in both cases, and still around a 9-10 point projection, they run into the end zone or they get a big play, big catch, 3 or 4 catch game on top of that. That could get them to 15 to 20 fantasy points real quick. So at $5,200, $5,100, these are 2 examples of ways that you can get that differentiation in there. But don't sleep on a Nick Chubb, who of course will be seeing some snaps out there for the Texans. I do like Woody Marks and his receiving upside a bit more though. And then Sean Tucker with the injury to Bucky Irving, he's also going to play some snaps for the Bucs, and he's already fallen into the end zone a few times over his career. And if he does that at only $4,400, maybe goes off for a 30 to 40 yard run on top of it, that could be his way to the optimal lineup. So, the chalk is really hard to get off of on a 2-game slate like this, but you're still going to have some of those low-owned diamonds in the rough to get yourself different. Go to wide receiver. We mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba and Amon-Ra as the main chalk at the top, both deserving of being that chalk at about a 20 to even 21 point projection. You can see an Amon-Ra edges out a Jackson Smith and Jigba, even though JSN's been the better wide receiver this year. That's mostly due to game environment, the higher total, the higher and better offense expected in that sort of a matchup. And you can see that's why I'm on that game, right? Even a JSN who's been otherworldly this year is lacking behind an Amon-Ra St. Brown. So that sort of trend, of course, continues across the rest of the player pool. The mid-tier, even the third string wide receivers are going to project a lot better in that game environment. But a Nico Collins, a player that I'm currently not planning on using, it's just hard to want to get there when you have these other top tier wide receivers, and it's in the game environment that I think isn't going to be as favorable. Worth noting that Emeka Egbuka could be active tonight, could also be rolled out as currently a game time decision for Monday Night Football. If he's out, that would open up a lot of wide receiver value on the slate, and most notably with some of these Tampa Bay guys at the bottom. A Sterling Shepard would go from a decent projection to one of the better projections on the slate. A Tez Johnson, same thing, would go from about 9 points to a little bit over a 10-point projection. And then even guys like a Cameron Johnson would see some snaps and probably won't see snaps if an Egbuka is active. These are the kind of players that you could use for some differentiation as well. And it is worth noting that on the Texans side, that Christian Kirk has been rolled out for this evening, which means that an Xavier Hutchinson, he's going to see some snaps. A Jaden Higgins, also a Jalen Noel, could see some snaps on the offensive side of the ball. So running back, there were some options that you could use for your leverage, but personally, my favorite position to get your leverage, get your differentiation, and even save some salary as well to try and take an extra spend up or two would be wide receiver. There's players here that are definitely going to see the field. You can see an Isaac Tesla down there at $3,100. I'll be using him in that high scoring game. He's yet to have that really big ceiling performance to this point, but we know that he's capable of it. I mean, we've seen some of the crazy circus catches that he's already posted this young into his career, and he only plays like 10 to 25% of snaps. So that gives him, obviously an extremely low floor, pretty much a 0-point floor, but an extremely high ceiling because he plays a lot of those snaps in the red zone. So a player that probably has to score a touchdown to get there, but if he does so, could get you to those 9 to 10 fantasy points, which pays off a $3,000 price tag. So a lot of intriguing options, I would say, towards the bottom. But in terms of my favorite plays that we have at this position, it'd be guys like a Mike Evans or Jameson Williams. $6,500 for Mike Evans isn't that cheap, but if Egbuka's out, his projection's going to soar through the roof. And then a Jameson Williams at $5,000, he's already projecting for over a 2.5x points per dollar value. A big play downfield wide receiver in a total that's nearly 55 points just screams of a long time and a big play touchdown. So he's the kind of player that I'll be jamming into a lot of my lineups. Saves you a little bit of salary at $5,000 as well. Next, let's go on to tight end. So you can see Sam Laporta is your most expensive tight end. And yeah, that's a pretty cheap price tag for your most expensive tight end. So even if you go to the quote unquote premier options here, you're going to be saving some salary on average. A Laporta, a Cade On, my favorites at that position because of the game environment. But a Dalton Schultz, he's a decent PPR option with Christian Kirk out. I think a lot of people look to those wide receivers for the value, but the tight ends could also see some extra usage because of that. And AJ Barner has had a few big weeks over the last month or so, but Elijah Arroyo, a player that I'll potentially be adding to the player pool for Seattle instead. You can see the ownership's about 3 times lower on Arroyo, and Arroyo has pretty much the same kind of receiving upside as a Barner, plays a few less snaps because he's not as good of a blocker at this point, but Arroyo's that same kind of downfield threat at tight end. And then Brock Wright, he's of course is in the better game environment of the two. Only $2,500, so it saves you all the salary you need to really spend up elsewhere, and he's already scored a few times over this season. So a few players to keep an eye on to get that differentiation, and yeah, 50% ownership on Laporta isn't great. 30% on a Schultz or an On is way higher than it'd be like in both cases, but you've got your differentiation options if you need to get there. And then at the defensive position, I'm usually taking these bottom 2 teams for my defenses. You know, I'm usually looking to punt it price-wise so I can spend up at other spots, and also trying to take the lowest owned defenses. So though the Seahawks are the best projection on the slate at 8.3 points, 2.77x points per dollar projection, it's hardly ever the defense that just has a sack or two, doesn't let up a whole lot of points, that ends up being the optimal defense. It's almost always one that either scores a defensive touchdown, that's a clear way on the 2-game slate to get to the optimal lineup, or the team that gets you like 2 or 3 sacks, a couple picks, maybe a fumble recovery or 2 to add points on top of that, that's getting to 12 or 13 points. The Seahawks defense is a great play for cash formats because of that price tag efficiency, but these other ones that are half the ownership, sometimes even a fourth of the ownership, like we have on the Buccaneers, like sure, I think the game's going to be a shootout. Like, I don't feel great about the Buccaneers here, but they're only 10% owned. They're only $2,400, so it helps you spend up at a few other spots. And sure, this might end up being a shootout, but that's not to say that one of the passing attempts doesn't go for a pick 6. Like, even in shootouts, you sometimes see the defense show up for a splash play like that. They block a punt for a touchdown. Like, there's a whole bunch of different ways that these defenses can get there that is completely isolated and completely separate from the amount of actual points that they're letting up. So give me that super low-owned defense pretty much across the board, and I'll be fading some of that chalk with the Seahawks. If you guys want to find these spreadsheets incomplete, updated up to the second on my Patreon page, make sure to join the NFL DFS tier. There's a link in the description of the video to my Patreon page. NFL DFS tier is how you download these for yourself. You can see my up-to-date player poll, exactly who I'll be using for this evening, projections that are accounting for all the different industry sentiment over the day. So of course the ownership projections will adjust to where the rest of the field is likely to come in so that you can make a lot of those game theory decisions. So if you guys want to check out these spreadsheets, download for yourself, check out my entire player poll before this evening starts, check out the NFL DFS tier. But now let's go to the prop and the betting side. Our slip's going to be a 2-legger on Prize Picks that has some correlation for a Lions-led script, and it's going to be for that Lions-Bucks game, the higher scoring of the two, and one where I expect to see quite a bit of offense. And because the Lions are the favorites, about a touchdown favorite, I think that they're the side that we should be favoring here, and assuming that the Bucks are doing a lot of passing. So let's start off with the Jack Fox under on punts, though. He's at 3.5 punts on Prize Picks, even money at that number. But on Draftkings, they do have an over-under for the total punts in the game, and that's at 6.5 between the two teams. It is heavily juiced towards the under. In fact, as of the last time I checked it, it was minus 145 towards the under direction. And we've got to realize here that Detroit are the favorites. They've also got an extremely aggressive coach, one that does not like to punt unless he absolutely has to, and they're expected to score more points this evening. So if they're going to be the more efficient offense, obviously have the lower implied punt total between the two teams. The implied total overall is closer to 6 because it is juiced heavily under at that 6.5. So if the average between the two teams is about 3 punts, you have the Lions as the better side, the more aggressive side as well. They're going to project lower than the Buccaneers are for their total punts per game. So 3.5 punts here, though we don't have an exact line for comparison. There's not a sports book that's going to give you an over-under on Jack Fox punts. If we did, he'd be close to minus 200 towards the under. At least that's where I have my projections. That's where my analytics point for this evening. And in that kind of a high-scoring affair with Campbell as their coach, I'm going to take the under on that all day. So that'll be the first prop that we go out there and mix in. And then the other side of it, if Detroit's not punting a whole lot, if they're going out there and scoring some points, I think that's reasonable to assume. If they're not going over that sort of a 4 line, high total, also the touchdown favorites this evening, then Rachaad White's going to get a lot of looks out of the backfield. And not only is he minus 133 towards his over on books, Draftkings has him at that number, FanDuel at that minus 130 mark. This could bump by the time that we get to this evening. But if you take a look at Bucky Irving's record, record. He was, of course, the running back one for Tampa Bay until he got hurt a couple weeks back. He went over this 3.5 line every single week. And even then, guys like Rachaad White were getting 1 to 2, even 3 receptions per game as the running back 2. Now he's the running back 1 because Irving's hurt. He's in a losing game script. They're 6-point underdogs this evening. Of course, we're taking the under on Jack Fox, so we're assuming that Detroit is keeping it on pace with the offense themselves. Rachaad White's going to see some targets out of the backfield. You've got a pretty solid defensive line, solid front 7 overall for the Detroit Lions. Not the easiest team to run against, but passing, you've seen them susceptible in the second half before. So Rachaad White could attack them that way. He's already been going over this line 2 of the last 3 weeks as the running back 1. And then you put him in a game environment like this with the correlation on the other side, and that's where there's some obvious value here. So minus 130 to minus 133 juice. Again, no exact line for the Jack Fox, but I think that one is severe line value in our favor, and we're getting a full 3x payout here. And not only are they individual pieces of line value, but you can see how they fit together with that game script as well. And that's really where you can find the sweet spot when it comes to this prop strategy, is finding value from multiple different avenues at the same time. And this kind of slip is one that I feel pretty good about for tonight's action. So that'll be the slip that we take here for this video. For all the action that I'm taking for Monday Night Football, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. Link down below to the NFL prop tiers, how you get access to all of that. $15 membership a month gives you every single slip that I'm entering, but it's an Underdog, Prize Picks, Hard Rock Bet. We'll have some exposure on that side as well. Obviously, you can't bet stuff like the punt lines on the sports books or on Hard Rock Bet, but we can on the Pick'em sites. So obviously, depending on the site that we're attacking, we try and find the best pieces of value that are available and leverage that and try and get a profitable portfolio by the end of the week. So check it out if you guys haven't already. That's all I've got for the Monday Night Football slate. Alrighty guys, that's all for the DFS and prop preview. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include our Thursday Night Football preview dropping off in just a day or so. Also our main slate previews throughout the rest of the season and every island game that we have covered here. But until next time, best of luck as I was saying. Hopefully I see you guys towards the top end of those GPPs. Hopefully we can cash out on that 2-leg prop slip as well. For a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page, that's where you can get the projection sheets that I was showing you before. Also every single prop slip that I'm entering. Go ahead and give me your top score for the Monday Night Football slate. If you guess the top score correct before anyone else ends up guessing that player, you'll win that free month access automatically. And all you have to do is just give me that player in the comments. That can be a Jahmyr Gibbs, that can be an Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's a lot of decent options from that Bucks-Lions game. Go ahead and guess your player down below. But until next time, guys, I appreciate your support in the channel. Best of luck, as I was saying, and I'll see you guys for Thursday Night Football.